Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Hilaal Live. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on DSTV channel 347 on Hilaal TV. Now, the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people is recognized by the United Nations in terms of observance. It is generally held on November the 29th, which is tomorrow, each year to mark the anniversary of Resolution 181, which advocated for the partition of Palestine into two states. This is according to the United Nations in terms of having one for Arab and one for Jewish. The awareness and the importance of this day remains even more important as the current genocide continues to occur in Gaza. Joining us now, I'd like to welcome Ubai Aboudi, who is the Executive Director of Bisan Centers for Research and Development in Ramallah. Ubai, assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and shukran so much for joining us.
Alaikum assalam, and thank you for hosting me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Ubai, I think when we, of course, observe this day on the 29th, I think it's a day that holds a lot of significance. But now, even more, it holds even more significance given what is happening in Gaza at this moment.
Well, of course, this is the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. It has been recognized and observed by the United Nations because the United Nations actually, when it came to power, one of its core mandates was to end colonialism. And colonialism is still very present in Palestine. Gaza is occupied, like the West Bank, and it is facing, the people there are facing a genocide on live television in front of the world. People in Gaza are going hungry. There's difficulty of access to water. The population in Gaza is being denied medical treatment because of the bombing, the hospitals and medical facilities, and the targeting of doctors and medical professionals. And also the aid that is supposed to go into Gaza is so little that it's not even able to change the current humanitarian crisis.
Ubay, obviously with Bisan Center, you do a lot of social justice work and, of course, advocating for the rights of the people, not just in Ramallah, but across Palestine as a whole. For the last, it's actually moving to the second month now, when us entering December. Is there a sense of disappointment within the people of especially Ramallah that this continues to occur and there is no real international condemnation? And when I speak of international condemnation, I mean it from the powers within the United Nations to really make that much of a difference. Or is it something that the people have come to accept and it is what it is?
Well, actually, of course, Palestinians and those of us that work in the field of human rights are gravely disappointed with the failure of international mechanisms to protect the Palestinian people, the failure to consider the Palestinian people as human beings, as worth of living, as their lives, property, well-being are being sacred and protected from harm, protected from destruction. And I think this reflects a deeper divide among the world between the global north and the global south, where we see that even powers from the global south have stood and voiced their condemnation for what's happening in Gaza, but also not limited to Gaza, also in the West Bank. And this has also been reflected even in the positions of I would say, globally among almost every leader from the global south. From the global north, unfortunately, the colonial powers remain dedicated to their colonialism, and the same powers that have practiced and held colonies and built empires in the past 100 years are the same ones, I would say, in general, that are also standing on the wrong side of history today. They fail the Palestinian people, but I think also they fail the very institutions that were built to prevent this from happening again. When the world said never again for genocide. It meant never again for all people, not for all white people.
Ubay, we're talking off air, and you just told me, there were residents of Ramallah who were shot waiting uh, uh, for the release of prisoners that have been held in Israeli jails for such a long time. And even now, while there's a ceasefire, I mean, it's disappointing, isn't it, that you still have, groups like the settlers that are in Ramallah and the West Bank that are still committing crimes, and it just goes unaccounted for.
Well, this is just to be clear, this is not just the settlers, this is also the official Israeli army. The Israeli system is built upon the disenfranchisement and dehumanization of the Palestinian people. And they keep their control over us through the use of the brute force, illegal court system, military, of course, court system, but also being more and more supplemented with their civilian courts that do not consider that Palestinians should enjoy the same basic rights as any human beings, and of course maintain what is being called the Jewish privilege system, where Jews are being privileged over all other groups living in Palestine. And this actually, when talking about prisoners, we should say that they are abductees.
Yes.
Although we sometimes use the word prisoners, but they are actually abductees. Yesterday, it was the release of 3 women and children, Palestinian children that have been systematically abducted by the Israeli occupation, put in front of military trials, military courts, denied their basic justice and their basic rights, criminalized and sent to jail to be abused, tortured, as many of them has testified in the previous days. They have testified that they were subjected to beatings, they were subjected to sexual assault, they were subject, and those are children, they were subjected to food denial. They were denied enough food and proper food for the past 40, 50 days, and they were subjected to various forms of degrading and dehumanizing treatment. This is systematic. This goes actually most of the time without being reported as an incident or as something. This is what Palestinians call usually slow violence. Slow violence is violence that is not reflected in the news, that is taken as granted, that is systematic violence, that is taken to be legal violence against Palestinians, and this is the way that the system is built. This kind of violence, even shooting people standing in front of a prison, waiting for their loved ones, for their family members to be released. So instead of having the celebrations of freedom, we are having to mourn or to worry for our injured that did nothing except wait for their family members to get out of jail.
Ubay, I'm sure you've seen across the world so many protests in support of the people of Palestine, more so over here in South Africa, where there's going to be quite a lot of events happening across the country. How much of hope does it give you as a Palestinian? And I ask this to many of the guests that I interview from Palestine, that hope, I know hope is a very difficult word right now for the people of that country, but when you look what is happening across the world, there is something, isn't there, which you can hold on to and say something is happening, that in the court of public opinion, the citizens of the world are winning.
Yes, of course. We believe that people have the power, and people, when they claim their power and raise their voices, they make policy shifts. Even the idea of humanitarian pauses and getting what little aid to Gaza that has gotten into the past couple of days wouldn't have been possible without the pressure that the people have put over on their governments. And this pressure, with its varying amounts and the varying degree of democracies that are present in countries, have made countries from taking very important steps, like the South African step of cutting ties with the apartheid Israel, or for other states to start shifting their positions and calling more and more for a ceasefire. And I think that this kind of global solidarity, this is what gives us as Palestinians hope for a better future, that Palestine will be free with the struggle of the Palestinian people and the support of people of conscience globally. This is something that uh, Palestinians, I would say, rely on, that people of consciousness are rising and holding their politicians accountable. And this is true solidarity. True solidarity is not just when it's comfortable, but also when it's not comfortable, when it puts people, I would say, when people have to take risks to raise their voice of repression, take risks of going against their government, official government policy, in order to maintain the basic idea that Palestinian lives matter, that Palestinian lives are not an excess, and people are in solidarity to protect these precious lives.
Ubai, shukran so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live, and you too take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's Ubai Aboudi coming to us from Ramallah. He's part of the Bisan Center for Research and Development. Do stay tuned to Hilaal Live. We'll be back after this break.